Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It is Friday, October 18th. We finally got to openings in the Sarah Boone trial. Had several witnesses up today. Never thought this day would get here. We're going to jump in because I'm going to be on STS podcast in just a bit. And I kind of want to have some of the evening to chill with my kids and Grammy. So I'm going to knock this out quickly. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Be sure to like the video and share it with your friends. Click that little bell icon if you want notifications of when I post new content. Let's hop into openings. It was very hard to hear a lot of the openings today. It wasn't really until the end of the defense openings that they turned on microphones or something. You could only hear when they were in front of the podium. But I tried to get as much of it as I could. And the state starts by saying that she zipped him in the suitcase, went to sleep, and left him in his final moments alone. Evidence will show George is dead because of her judgment. She had no conscious regard for if he died. You'll hear from a video that began at 11:12 p.m. on February 23rd, 2020 in Orange County, Florida. You'll see a suitcase face down with the zippers facing the floor. Sarah will say, "For everything you've done to me, F you." And then she laughs. She calls him stupid. She says, "Sarah, that's my name. Don't wear it out." You hear George say, "Sarah, I can't breathe." Sarah, Sarah. She laughs again. "I can't breathe, babe." She laughs again and says, "That's on you." She was intoxicated. She shushes him, and that's the last thing she says to him as he's face down, zipped up in a suitcase. 11:23 p.m., there is a second 22-second video of Sarah zooming in on the suitcase, and all you hear from George one more time is, "Sarah." How did we get here? She wakes up in the late morning, goes downstairs and doesn't see George anywhere, and then realizes he's still in the suitcase. She takes him out and tries resuscitation. She says she hears gurgling, but she doesn't call 911. She calls her ex-husband, Brian. She says, "We were playing hide and seek," and she didn't zip it up all the way. She said there was enough room for his little fingers to get out. She says, "We were having fun." She says she went to shower and then came down and saw him playing in the suitcase. She said, "We thought it was funny. I'm going to zip you up." She said she went upstairs thinking he could get out, and she insists she wasn't drunk, but you can judge for yourselves. She said they didn't argue that night, but the next day, police find the videos. She's asked to come in for another interview on February 25th. She described past instances of violence. He hit her in the head with a curtain rod a month ago, but says, "We've been good since then." She says, "He comes at me, so I flee. I go upstairs or I go to my ex-husband's house." She says she doesn't want to drink, but she does it to placate George. She doesn't remember taking photos or videos, and they ask if she wants to see it. She says she can't watch. She says she flipped the suitcase over between the two videos. She said she didn't mean to do this, and her intention was not to leave him there. She said they both got in there. She had no injuries on her, and we have photos of that. She insists there was no violence that day. But when law enforcement asked why she said F you to George, she says, "We were having a good day. That's how we are." Also on her phone, a conversation between George's brother and the owner of the phone from December 2019. The owner of the phone was Sarah. And the text from the brother says, "Yo, my daughter told me what you did. I don't want you around my daughter, my nieces or nephews." Sarah says, "Ugh, your dad hit me in the face." The next text, "Hide and seek, I shall." January 13th, another heated discussion, and she says in a text to George's brother, "It's a Torres thing. Boo. Keep the fugly creep out." Brother says, "Please do something with yourself, Sarah. God bless you." Sarah says, "And bless all of you too." I'll get rid of him and it will be better. Ugh, Torres. The defense openings, they were down and out and their life centered around alcohol. As codependent as you could be towards each other. And with all that was domestic violence. She suffered from the psychological effects of violence from an intimate partner. In the 3 years they were together, there were prior acts of violence. We have photos. Police were called to the scene and they took photos. Keep an open mind. February 23rd, 2020, the day of the event, they bought wine that day before and didn't finish it. It was in the refrigerator, and that's how they started their day. You'll see a video from Publix where they both go inside about noon and come out with a large bottle of wine, and there's a receipt. George was jealous of Sarah, and in certain situations can be charming, but when he is at a certain level of intoxication, he gets mad and moody. And a lot of times it involved domestic violence or forcible sex with Sarah. By 5 p.m., the wine's gone. George told Sarah he wanted to leave to get cigarettes, and she thought he would go to a store near their apartment. But he got her car keys and debit card and went to Publix to get more wine. When he comes back with the wine, she knows this is not good. She knows he will get to that other level of intoxication. She tries to keep him busy and in a good mood, and she drinks as well. They're both drunk and they get silly, and they decide to play hide and seek. She goes upstairs, takes a shower, and waits, but he doesn't come upstairs. She gets cold and tired and wants to go to sleep. She goes downstairs. A week before, they got an old suitcase to donate. They both weigh 100 pounds and they're malnourished. She sees him getting into the suitcase. They laugh and she zips him up and they laugh for a while after. She sits on the couch and he says, "I can't breathe." His face is facing the zipper and she opened it 2 to 3 inches. They're intoxicated and she doesn't know if he's just saying that he can't breathe. But he has to listen to her. It's a unique form of physical restraint and she lets him have it. There's another video 11 minutes later. In the first video, the suitcase is flipped upside down. By the second video, she flipped it right side up so he could get out. And you hear George in that second video say, "Sarah." The key to this case is in the 11 minutes and what happened in between the two videos. She will take the stand and explain what happened and why. The evidence will show she was justified. The law says we all have the right to invoke the right of self-defense. You'll hear from the medical examiner about bruising on George. He was in the suitcase a while, dead. That changes things a bit. Sarah will explain the bruising. Her son comes to stay from time to time, and in his room is a bat, the same one George used, where you'll see a video of him threatening Sarah and swinging it at the TV 7 times. She loved him. You're going to hear why women don't leave, and you'll hear about her mental health struggles. She didn't want him to die, but she hated the abuse, and he kept coming back. She didn't have family support. She was weak and vulnerable. She sleeps in because she's drunk, realizes he's still in the suitcase. She unzips it, and he's purple. She freaks out. The only family she has is her ex-husband. He says he's coming over. She calls him again, and he gets there, sees George, and tells her to call 911. She gives a statement to law enforcement, and they take her phone and say they'll bring it back the next day. But instead, they ask her to come to the sheriff's office. They were going to arrest her based on the 2 videos and try to get her to confess. The interrogation was 2 hours, and she lied. She's scared because she sees they're trying to pin this on her as intentional, but it wasn't. She's not an attorney. She doesn't understand self-defense and that she was justified in using the force she used. It was unconventional, but still self-defense. Battered women experience affects her perception of imminent danger. Victims of repeat violence may fear death in situations others would not. After hearing this case, we're confident you will have reasonable doubt and find her not guilty. It's the right thing to do. The first witness is Juan Torres, younger brother of George. He says the families lived in Central Florida for 20 plus years. And before that, they were in Massachusetts as well as Philadelphia. He talked to George weekly. They lived about 5 to 10 minutes apart, but he said he tried not to go to George and Sarah's too much. Obviously, Juan did not get along with Sarah. George called him on February 23rd around 7:30 p.m. And during that call, he heard Sarah in the background yelling. She was still yelling when they ended the call. That was the last conversation he had with his brother. On Cross, they talk about siblings in Orlando, but George never stayed with the brother on the stand or any of the other siblings. He said George sounded fine on the phone. He wasn't slurring his words and he did not seem drunk. Sarah was yelling to George, "Tell him about choking me." Juan said he did not ask George what Sarah was talking about. He says their parents also live in the area and George would sometimes go stay with them. They kept the witness subject to recall, so we may hear from him again. There were two witnesses very quick on and off the stand just to validate some evidence. Public's surveillance videos from February 23rd, that first visit at 12:17 p.m. and then at 5:39 p.m. The next witness, Joan Williams, the 911 operator who validated the 911 call. Next witness, Vincent Battaglia. He lived at the apartments in Winter Park, Florida, and was in school, currently lives in New Jersey, but he lived right next door to Sarah and George. He had a roommate at the time. He was neighbors with the couple for a little over a year, and he interacted a few times with them. One time he went to tune a guitar for Sarah's son inside the unit. He said the walls were very thin between their apartments, and he could hear arguing almost daily. About 5 months before the incident, he was out smoking on his back patio and she approached him. This was between midnight and 2 a.m. Sarah put her fingers to her lips and said to keep his mouth shut. Don't report anything about arguing or yelling. And he was like, okay. February 23rd stuck out to him. He said there was a loud noise, and whatever it was shook his bedroom wall. He was on the phone with his girlfriend, who heard it as well through the phone, and asked him what it was. He did hear arguing that night, and the last thing he heard was that loud banging noise and then some shuffling. At some point during the evening, he did hear, "I hate you," but couldn't really understand much past that. He heard both Sarah and George's voices and said it was back and forth. He said sometimes over the course of living next to them, he would leave his bedroom just to get away from the noise. On Cross, he was told by neighbors that police had been called in the past, but he never personally saw police respond to Sarah and George's apartment. He knew George and Sarah both drank in excess. He got home around 1 or 2 p.m. that day. He heard some arguing, but said it really got worse around 10:30 p.m. On a redirect, they asked him to clarify when he heard that loud sound in relation to hearing that arguing at about 10:30. He said it was about 30 to 45 minutes after that. The next witness, his roommate at the time, Brandon Moats, he said he avoided Sarah and George as much as he could. He learned to tune them out because they argued all the time. February 23rd, between 7 and 8 p.m., he could hear arguing from his bedroom. Their unit was one story. Sarah and George had a two-story unit. He also heard that loud sound around 11 p.m. and said he heard what sounded like something falling down the stairs. He said he and his roommate talked the next day about how that shook their rooms. On Cross, her attorneys asked about any interactions that he had with Sarah and George. He said he doesn't like drunk people, and they were drunk a lot. In 2019, his roommate told him that Sarah fell asleep on the patio, so he went to see for himself. Another interaction with Sarah was her trying to talk to him, and he said she seemed paranoid and rambling. He said the vibe she gave off was that she did not want to go back inside her apartment. The next witness, Sarah's ex-husband, Brian Boone. He said they dated from the late 90s into 2005 when they got married. They have one son together, separated in 2016, and that divorce was final in 2017. They did have a custody arrangement up until she was arrested. And the night of February 23rd, Sarah called him around 11 p.m. He said she sounded drunk. He did not hear George in the background, but he said he really wasn't paying much attention. He started calling her that next morning around 11 a.m. because it was her day to pick up her son. He said she was not very good about getting him on the day she was supposed to have him. He finally got her on the phone around 12:30 and she told him that George was dead and asked him to come over. She told him they had been playing hide and seek and she fell asleep. He told her to call 911 and he would be on his way. And while he was on his way to her place, she called him to be sure he was on his way. And again, he told her to call 911. But when he got there, she still had not called 911. He went into the front doorway, into the entrance, and saw George in the living room. He could see part of George's legs and his feet, but he didn't go in any further. Sarah said she would call 911 and she would have a drink and a cigarette. He said he was not comfortable staying inside, so he went outside and waited. He was there when police arrived and he did talk to law enforcement. There was no cross on that, but he is subject to recall. Next, they played the 911 call. One thing that stuck out to me, she really doesn't sound super upset, but she tells the story about hide and seek and how she fell asleep, and then she doesn't know what happened. She said he has blood coming out of his mouth, but she doesn't know if he had an aneurysm or something. She said she took George out of the suitcase and was giving him CPR. She said he isn't conscious and he's purple. The dispatch tells her to try CPR, and so she counts. And one thing that stood out to me a lot is I've done CPR, and between your adrenaline and how physically demanding CPR is, you get out of breath really quickly. She did not. It just sounded like she was counting. I'm just saying that's my observation, not what happened, but stood out to me. She tells dispatch that he is stiff and purple. And at one point, she says, breathe. Then she says, what happened? At this point, first responders come in and start asking her questions, which you really can't hear. And then the call ends. The next witness, Abraham Moreno. He's maintenance at the apartment complex. And on February 24th, he was asked by the manager to go to Sarah's unit. At this point, police and the ex-husband were there. Sarah wanted to talk to him and the manager of the complex. She said she's confused and doesn't know what happened, gives the hide and seek story, and said she was going to teach him a lesson. She said George went into the suitcase himself. Then she went upstairs, fell asleep, and doesn't know what happened after that. On cross, there's some back and forth about whether or not he was interviewed by law enforcement that day. He says yes. The defense asked if he was interviewed 2 days later and told the detective what Sarah said about teaching him a lesson. He said he told law enforcement they were playing hide and seek, and he thinks he mentioned that she said she was trying to teach him a lesson. The defense asked if that's his recollection, that he told the officer that, and he says yes. When asked if he met with the state before trial, he said he had a brief chit chat over the phone on September 23rd of this year. Did you tell them over the phone that Sarah said she was teaching George a lesson and things got out of hand and then she fell asleep? He says yes. When asked on February 26th of 2020 if he told the officer the same thing, he said as far as he can remember, he did. He said he actually knew George from the 90s from Philadelphia. George was a teenager. He lived down the street from the witness and his wife. After meeting again, they really didn't have a friendship, but they were more like acquaintances. He is subject to recall. The next witness, Deputy Kayla Rodriguez with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, she responded to the scene. She had body cam on, which they play. She walks inside. Sarah tries to follow, but she's told she can't go in. She tells the story about drinking and playing hide and seek, and she doesn't know what to do. She says her ex-husband came over and then she called 911. She says she fell asleep and the deputy asked, "When did you do CPR?" Sarah says, "Before I called 911." She says she woke up at 11 that morning but didn't come downstairs until 12:30. In the video, the deputy walks upstairs. You see some beds. The deputy goes back out. Sarah asked for water 2 or 3 times. Sarah said she went upstairs around 12:30 in the morning and fell asleep, forgetting George was in the suitcase. She said he got himself in and then she zipped him up to make him squirm a bit. But then again, she said, "I fell asleep." She came downstairs at 12:30, remembering George was in the suitcase, got him out, did CPR. She said air was coming out and he was gurgling as she was doing CPR. Sarah said she's afraid for her life because his family has never liked her, and she's asking about when they're going to tell George's family that he's dead. The investigator said they would make that notification in person, and Sarah says this was not intentional, but his family will not accept that. That was the end of the body cam, and there was no cross. The next witness, I'm going to keep playing this body cam video on YouTube because he was there at the same time, and it's really just another angle of the same body cam footage. But he responded to the scene, and they admit his body cam in as well. When he got there, he saw George lying on his back in the dining area, and they admit that footage in. The detectives are trying to talk to Sarah, saying that they'll know a lot more tomorrow morning as far as how George died and why. She says again, it wasn't intentional. She asks what and when they're going to tell his family. The detective says they'll be waiting for the autopsy results and they will tell them why they're there and what they're investigating when they go make that death notification. Sarah says they're going to think I killed him. Sarah then tells the investigators that all of her family is dead and she is nobody. The next witness, Melissa Roughgarden, she is a crime scene investigator with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. They admit some photos from the crime scene, photos of the kitchen, the 2 empty wine bottles that were in the trash on top, Publix receipts for the wine. One photo has a baseball bat that's leaning up against the wall. They show photos of the stairs leading up to the second floor. There were pieces of paper from inside the suitcase that were soaked in blood. There was also a photo of Sarah from the parking lot outside of the apartments. Photos of Sarah's hands, their face up, face down, and just other photos of her. They bring the wine bottles into the courtroom, they bring in the baseball bat, and they bring in the suitcase. On cross, the defense asked questions about what the medical examiner uses from the crime scene technician's work. She really doesn't know. She said they collect DNA, and from there it's sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for analysis. When asked who made the decision to not do DNA from inside the suitcase, she said, "The detective and I." He says, "You don't know who it belonged to because you didn't bother to have it analyzed." And she says, "We didn't collect it." The defense asked, as far as the back goes, "Did you do a fiber analysis?" No. He asked why. She said it wasn't done. He asked why photograph the child's bedroom, and she said it's my job to document the scene. When asked if she documented any holes in the wall, no. Also, no photos indicating prior violence. He said, "Speaking about the zippers, you have experience with zippers?" And she says, "I use zippers regularly, yes." He stepped right into that one. Regarding the zipper on the suitcase, you said it was difficult to use them. And she said, "Yes, it was tight." When asked if she only tried to do that today, she says, "Yes." On a redirect, the state just has her reiterate she didn't see any holes in the walls to photograph. Also, George did have blood on his face. It was actually coming from his nose and his mouth, and he had other defects on his body. Also, point out Sarah had no visible injuries on herself. So that was it. Day one, lots of witnesses. They just really quickly got them up, no fiddling around, just to the point, on and off. This may not take as long as we think, but then again, y'all, Sarah Boone's going to take the stand in narrative form. So if you watched the Robert Tejas trial with us, narrative form, instead of getting questioned, you sit up there and tell your story in its entirety. Y'all, we might be here till the second coming. That woman is going to be hard to get off the stand. We will be back live streaming Monday at 9 a.m. And again, Monday night, I'll give you guys a recap of the day's testimony in an hour or less, like today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening and have a good weekend. We will see you soon.